So, you have decided that you're interested in opera. Warms my heart. But you have 1, 2, and maybe 3 or 4 pick-me where you have to do something with them during the day or in the evening, and you want to keep their mind stimulated and engaged. But opera has these themes of sex and violence and love and death, and they might not always be appropriate for younger audiences. In this video, I'm going to break down age-appropriate opera for the little ones in our lives. Hey y'all, Cassandra here with Opera Appreciation for Black and Brown folks. Yes! And on this channel, I make opera equitable by teaching you how to appreciate a little bit more opera in your daily life. All right, let's jump into today's video. So remember, opera is just a storyline that is mixed with music and singing together, and that the singers are usually opera singers whose sound is not amplified with microphones. But we are going to be talking about a little bit of musical theater today because there are operas that are age appropriate, but they usually fall under what's called operetta, which I'll talk about in a moment, or musical theater. Now, operetta and musical theater are really similar, very, very similar. In fact, musical theater was birthed out of operetta, and operetta was birthed out of opera. Operetta is literally the Italian diminutive for little opera. And the only way it got popular was in France by the 1850s. France popularized it, and it became more of an independent entity separate from what we call opera. So what's the difference? Opera has a larger orchestra, it has more people on stage. The stories that are often shared, and they're talking about sex and violence and death and love, which can be really wonderful. It's a romance, but it might not be age appropriate for a child when that very same romantic couple that got together in the first act and you see the heroine dying in the last act. It's a little bit hard for a young mind to digest. In operetta, we deal with lighter themes, hence lighter opera, hence musical theater. Lighter opera or operetta has usually spoken dialogue. It's usually predominantly comedic, and they're much shorter in length. So an average opera is about 2.5 hours, just like a movie, but an operetta can be anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour. It's usually all put into one act, maybe 2 if we're pushing it, but everything is usually done within an hour. So they're perfect for age-appropriate little boys and girls out there to enjoy a little bit of operetta or musical theater. Now, operetta is a little bit different in that, and from musical theater, in that it still keeps with the unamplified voices, whereas musical theater is usually a voice that's been amplified with a microphone and sound systems. But we got a lot of our classic musical theater from composers who were writing in the style of operetta, because the difference between operetta and musicals is that operetta was sort of satirical. It was like their version of Saturday Night Live back in the 18th and 19th century. They were looking at things that were happening in the world and poking fun of them in a satirical way on theater stages all over the country. But musical theater is more fanciful and comedic and lighter subjects that have nothing to do with what's happening in the current day. All right, so now why do we want to bring musical theater or operetta or even just opera to our children? Remember, children are little sponges. They're looking to understand and engage with their world through their senses. And our ears and our visual is one of the most powerful senses that human beings use on a regular basis. In fact, when children are in the womb, all the way until they're 10 years old, they are developing their musical sensibilities based on what they are exposed to. So it's a perfect time to bring opera to these young little burgeoning minds, because the brain is constantly trying to navigate what's happening. It's literally detecting information and trying to make sense of it all. And why not do that while a brain is growing and emerging? Because the more information that it collects in, it's going to help expand the mind in ways that we know and don't know yet, because we're still studying the brain. Now I'm going to go through all of the operas that I think are age appropriate for young children around the age of 8 and a little older. So first I'm going to start this list with a group of composers that I think were really slaying the game with musical theater / operetta, and that's Gilbert and Sullivan. They were really popular at the end of the 18th century. They wrote 14 comedic operas that we still love and listen to today. The most popular operas that they wrote is HMS Pinafore, The Pirates of Penzance, and The Mikado. All really funny and comical and light and perfect for children. The next composer librettist combination was Rodgers and Hammerstein. They put out so much wonderful work, and they are some of the most popular music that we listen to today. Rodgers and Hammerstein came out with first Oklahoma, and we love that musical, and it even was turned into a whole feature-length film. The next 4 musicals that they produced together was Carousel, The King and I, South Pacific, although if you watch South Pacific now, it's got some racial undertones that don't age well, so just be mindful of that, but the music's fantastic, and The Sound of Music. So if I love you, oh what a beautiful morning, oh what a beautiful day, some enchanted evening, the hills are alive with the sound of music. Ah, Valley High, something calls you, South Pacific, getting to know you, getting to know all about you. These are a few of my favorite things. Climb every mountain, doe a deer, a female deer, ray, a drop of golden sun. The next and final composer I want to point out is actually Gian-Carlo Menotti. Gian-Carlo decided to be his own librettist and composer. However, of those 20-something operas that he wrote, you really do need to do your research on them, because he likes to use that satirical perspective to poke fun at things that are like, ooh, I didn't know that people actually felt that way. So do be sure to do your homework. But 2 that I can be absolutely sure, Amal and the Night Visitors and The Old Maid and the Thief. Now, all right, so here's the list of operas that I believe are age appropriate in the opera world. Die Zauberflöte, which means the magic flute in German. Now, Die Zauberflöte, or the magic flute, is really lovely to see. The Metropolitan Opera puts on a fantastic performance. It's perfect for a young audience because they can just enjoy the fanciful story being unfolded before them. And just like Hansel and Gretel, which is essentially I think it could be turned into a horror movie because it's about an old woman that's trying to eat children, and yet we turn that into a fairy tale. It's an underlying theme that's trying to tell children to be mindful of strangers, but telling it in a very kind of weird way, but that's what we call a fairy tale, right? That leads me to the next one, which is another fairy tale of Cendrillon, the Cinderella, or La Cenerentola. There are 2 operas of the Cinderella story. There's the French version by Massenet, and then there's the Italian version by Rossini, La Cenerentola and Cendrillon. Cinderella, we all know the story, but they're great to go watch. Then there is Pinocchio. This is actually a more recent opera. The Adventures of Pinocchio was put on in 2007. The next one is L'Enfant et les Sortilèges. Now, this one is by Ravel. This story is about a little boy that doesn't want to listen to his mama when she says to clean up his room, and instead he's misbehaving and he starts to destroy his room, and then his toys come to life and say, don't you care about us? Like, don't you want to take care of us? And so I think it's good for young minds to watch because it's teaching them to be responsible. It's teaching them to pick up after themselves. It's teaching them to listen to their mama. The next opera that is age appropriate is La Fille de Régiment by Donizetti. Donizetti, again, an Italian composer, but in this one, it is a full opera. What's really awesome about this particular opera, basically about a young woman, Marie, who is found by a whole group of soldiers. She's found as a baby, and they raise her. She doesn't know what it is to be a girl. And I love this part of it because it's showing that women can really do anything that we want to set our minds to. We don't have to be genteel and, soft and supplicating. We can be strong and engaged and forward-thinking and wanting to live our lives fully. And the character of Marie definitely does that. Now, the last one I'm going to mention is the Cunning Little Vixen. And now when I was doing the research on this, I was like, oh, this is so sad. It's essentially like the Bambi story, but from the perspective of a fox. And what's kind of fun about it is that the animals are anthropomorphized, but there's a death in there, just like Bambi watches his mother die. It's the same idea. The cunning little vixen gets shot by the local forester, and so yeah, it's a little bit sad. So just be mindful of that. All right, guys, that's my share for today. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe to my weekly videos. And remember, this is Opera Appreciation for Black and Brown folks, making opera equitable. Thank you so much. Bye.